Hooves tore through moonlit brush. Eliza ran, skirts torn, breath tearing at her lungs, a leather notebook clutched so tight her knuckles had gone white. She didn't look back, she didn't have to. The sound behind her was getting louder. A rider broke through the tree line, fast, deliberate. Not a rancher out for a night ride, a man sent to make sure what she knew never reached town. Eliza's foot caught a root. She went down hard, notebook skidding from her grip. For one frozen second, sprawled in the dirt with the rider closing in, her face said everything words couldn't. She wasn't just afraid. She was certain this was how it ended. Then, hoofbeats from another direction. A second rider cut across the path, gun already drawn, putting himself between her and the man chasing her. Stay down. She didn't know him, but she was about to learn that in this town, the loudest secret wasn't the one everyone was whispering about. It was the one that had just saved her life. 3 weeks earlier. None of this had happened yet. Eliza hadn't even crossed into the territory. She was still 2 days out by stagecoach, notebook empty, expecting nothing more than another dusty cattle town and another forgettable story to fill column inches back east. The town she was riding toward was called Hollow Creek, and Hollow Creek had a favorite son. His name was Cole Ransom, and every woman between 16 and 60 had an opinion about him. The butcher's daughter swore he'd tipped his hat to her once and hadn't smiled in months, like the gesture had cost him something. The schoolteacher kept a chair open at church, just in case he decided grief had run its course. Even the mayor's wife, married 31 years, had been heard saying that a man who carried sorrow like Cole did deserved a second look. Nobody quite remembered how the story started. Something about a fire. Something about a woman he'd loved and lost years back in a way nobody could name specifics for. But everybody believed. That was the trick of it. Nobody needed to know the details. They only needed to believe there were details worth knowing, and Cole let them believe it. He was good at silence. Good at the long look toward the horizon when someone brought up family. Good at declining a dance at the spring social with just enough sorrow in his voice that the girl who'd asked walked away feeling like she'd trespassed on something sacred. What nobody in Hollow Creek knew, what nobody had ever thought to ask, was that Cole's cattle sold for 11% above market rate. Consistently. Because the auctioneer, moved nearly to tears by the poor man's story, always opened the bidding generous. What nobody knew was that the general store carried his tab longer than anyone else's, 3 months sometimes, because Mrs. Petrie behind the counter couldn't bring herself to press a grieving man for coin. What nobody knew was that sympathy, applied patiently and correctly, was worth more in Hollow Creek than gold. Cole Ransom wasn't lonely. Cole Ransom was working, and he was very, very good at his job, good enough that not one soul in 6 years had thought to check his work. Eliza arrived on a Tuesday, dust-covered and unimpressed by the whole town before she'd even stepped off the coach. She'd built a small reputation writing frontier stories for an Eastern paper, the kind of pieces readers devoured because they made the West sound romantic instead of exhausting. But Eliza herself had stopped being romantic about anything a long time ago. She'd learned, across a decade of towns just like this one, that the story everyone agreed on was usually the story someone had built on purpose. She checked into the boarding house. She asked polite questions, and within an hour she'd heard Cole Ransom's name 11 times. "You'll want to write about him," the boarding house keeper told her, refilling her coffee without being asked. "Saddest story in the territory. Sweetest man, too. Never complains." Eliza smiled the smile she used when she didn't believe a word she was hearing. "Sounds like quite a story." "Oh, it is." "Does anyone actually know it? The details, I mean." The keeper paused, cup halfway to the table. "Well, no, not exactly. He doesn't talk about it." Eliza wrote nothing down. Not yet. But something in her chest had already tightened, the particular feeling she got when a story was too smooth, too agreed upon. Grief was messy. Grief had contradictions and holes and people who remembered things differently. This story had none of that. It had been polished the way a stone gets polished, by years of hands passing it along without ever once turning it over. She met Cole 2 days later at the edge of his land, where he was mending a fence alone in the heat. He looked up, found the sorrow look, the one that worked on everyone, held it a second too long. "You'd be the writer," he said. "Word travels." "Eliza Prescott." She didn't offer a hand. "I hear you've got quite the story." "I don't tell it much." "That's what everyone says." She let the silence sit there watching him. "Funny thing about that. Nobody tells it much, but everybody knows exactly how it goes." Something flickered behind his eyes. Small, fast, gone before most people would have caught it, but Eliza caught it. "Ma'am, I don't know what you're implying." "I'm not implying anything, Mr. Ransom." She smiled, the same smile from the boarding house. "Yet." She turned and walked away before he could answer, and behind her, Cole Ransom stood very still in the sun, fence work forgotten, watching the first person in 6 years who hadn't looked at him with pity. That night, Eliza opened her notebook for the first time and wrote a single line. Ask who benefits from a story nobody's allowed to question. Then, underneath it, a second line. Find out what he's protecting. The digging started small, a letter here, a dismissed comment there. An old newspaper from a town 2 territories over, 3 years old, mentioning a Ransom family and a land dispute. No fire, no tragedy, no dead sweetheart, just a messy inheritance fight that Cole had apparently walked away from richer than he arrived. She found a rancher, retired now half-deaf, who remembered Cole from before Hollow Creek. "Charming boy," the old man said. "Always did land on his feet, that one. Never could figure how." Piece by piece, the polished stone started showing its seams. She started keeping 2 notebooks after that. One she let people see, harmless notes on cattle prices and church socials, the kind of thing a frontier writer was supposed to care about. The other stayed hidden beneath the false bottom of her travel case, the one where the real questions lived, growing longer and sharper by the day. There was a woman named Delphine who ran the laundry, who mentioned once, almost in passing, that Cole's shirts never came in torn or stained the way a working rancher's should. "Man mends fences every day, or so he says," Delphine muttered, scrubbing a collar. "Funny how his hands never blister." There was the boy who delivered feed, who let slip that Cole's herd was smaller than anyone assumed, barely enough to justify the money that moved through his name every season. Small things, none of them proof on their own. But Eliza had learned long ago that the truth rarely announced itself. It waited in the gaps between the things everyone agreed to stop asking about. Eliza knew she needed more than suspicion. She needed proof solid enough that Hollow Creek couldn't simply blink it away and keep believing what was easier to believe. So she kept asking, kept writing, kept circling closer, and Cole noticed. He found her outside the church one evening, the two of them alone under a sky just starting to purple. "You've been asking about me," he said. No performance in his voice this time. Just flat, "I ask about everyone, it's the job." "You don't believe the story." "I believe you've told it very well." Eliza held his gaze. "I just don't think you've told it true." For a long moment neither of them spoke. Then Cole laughed short, humorless. "You think this is a con?" "I think," Eliza said slowly, "that a man who's been quietly profiting off a town's sympathy for 6 years isn't going to enjoy someone finally asking him to prove it." "You don't know anything about what I've lost." "Then tell me." Eliza folded her arms. "Name her. Tell me where she's buried. Tell me the date. You've had 6 years to get the details right, and you still can't give me a single one that holds still." Cole's mouth opened and closed again. For the first time since she'd arrived in Hollow Creek, she watched him search for words and come up empty. "That's what I thought," she said quietly. His jaw tightened. "Careful." "Is that a warning, Mr. Ransom?" "It's advice." His voice dropped, and for the first time the sorrow was gone completely, replaced by something colder. "This town loves me. You show up with nothing but suspicion and you'll be the stranger nobody trusts. Not me." Eliza didn't flinch. "Maybe. Or maybe I'll be the woman who finally asked the question everyone else was too polite to." She walked away that night with her pulse hammering, but she didn't let it show until she was alone in her room, door locked, notebook trembling slightly in her hands as she wrote down every word of the conversation while it was still fresh. She didn't know it yet, but she just made herself a problem Cole Ransom couldn't afford. Because Cole had more riding on his reputation than sympathy discounts and generous auction bids. In 4 weeks, he was set to marry Constance Whitfield, only daughter of Elias Whitfield, the richest rancher in 3 counties. It wasn't love, not really, though Constance believed it was. To her, Cole was the tragic, gentle man the whole town adored, finally choosing to build a future instead of mourning the past. To Cole, the marriage was the biggest score of his life. Land, cattle, standing, all secured by nothing more than a story he'd never once had to prove. If Eliza Prescott published even half of what she was circling, the marriage would collapse. The town would turn. Everything he'd built on quiet, patient sympathy would come apart in a single afternoon. He couldn't let that happen. He didn't go looking for violence first. Not right away. Violence was messy, and Cole had never once in 6 years needed to be messy. Charm had always been enough. So he tried charm again, showed up at the boarding house with an apology, an invitation to hear the real story, an offer that might have worked on someone less certain of what she'd already found. Eliza listened, polite and unmoved, and told him plainly she'd publish nothing she couldn't prove. But she fully intended to prove it. That was when Cole understood charm wasn't going to work this time. He sent word to a man named Silas Duke, someone he'd used once before, back in the territory with the land dispute, to make an inconvenient claim quietly disappear. Silas didn't ask questions. Silas simply arrived 3 days later and took a room at the edge of town under a false name. Eliza noticed him almost immediately. The way he watched the boarding house a little too long, the way he never quite looked at her but always seemed to know where she was. Old instinct, sharpened by a decade of chasing stories men didn't want told her to be careful. She was right to listen to it. 2 nights later, someone went through her room while she was at supper. Nothing taken, except her notebook was 2 inches from where she'd left it, close enough that she might have doubted herself. Far enough that she knew she hadn't. Her hands shook as she gathered her things. She had enough now, enough contradictions, enough witnesses, enough proof, to write something that would matter. But sitting still in Hollow Creek wasn't safe anymore, and she knew it. She decided to leave that night, on foot, cutting through the brush toward the next town over, where she could wire her editor and get the story moving before anyone could stop her. She didn't get far before she heard the hoofbeats behind her. This is the part of the story where everything you've learned collides head-on with everything you're about to find out. And if you've made it this far, you already know it's about to get worse before it gets better. Hit subscribe now, because the next few minutes change everything you think you understand about Cole Ransom. And if you've got a guess about who's really chasing her, drop it in the comments before the reveal. You are not ready for this one. Eliza ran. Skirts torn, breath tearing at her lungs, notebook clutched so tight her knuckles went white. Silas closed the distance behind her, unhurried, certain. A man who'd done this before and expected no trouble finishing it now. She went down hard when her foot caught a root, the notebook skidding from her grip into the dirt. For one frozen second, sprawled with Silas nearly on top of her, she understood with total clarity that she might not survive the next 30 seconds. Then the second rider came out of nowhere. Stay down. Eliza didn't recognize him, didn't have time to. She watched, breath held, as the stranger placed his horse and his body between her and Silas without a moment's hesitation, gun raised, voice hard as flint. "Ride off," the stranger said. "Or don't. Your choice." Silas hesitated just long enough to weigh the odds, then wheeled his horse and vanished back into the dark, choosing to report failure over risking a bullet. Only once the hoofbeats faded did the stranger turn to her, holstering his gun, offering a hand she stared at before finally taking. "You all right?" "Who are you?" Eliza's voice shook, adrenaline still flooding her. "Name's Nathaniel Boone." He crouched, picked up her fallen notebook and held it out to her, but didn't let go right away. "And I think you and I have been chasing the same man for very different reasons." Eliza stared at him. "You know Cole?" "I know what he did to my sister 4 years ago in a town 200 miles from here." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. Different name back then. Same story. Same sympathy. Same ending, her savings gone, her heart broken, and half the town still defending him after. "What happened to her?" Nathaniel was quiet a moment, staring off toward the tree line like the answer lived somewhere out there in the dark. She never fully came back from it, not the trust part. She still flinches when a stranger's kind to her for no reason. His voice roughened. "That's what he takes in the end, not just money. He teaches good people not to trust kindness anymore." Something in Eliza's chest cracked open, not fear this time, but recognition. She wasn't the first. She wasn't even the first to nearly die trying to expose him. "Why didn't you go to the law?" "Tried. He's careful, charming." By the time anyone believed her, he'd already gone. Nathaniel finally let go of the notebook. I've been following him for 2 years, waiting for someone to get proof solid enough to stick. Looks like you might have done it. Eliza looked down at the notebook in her hands, dirt-smudged now, corner bent, but intact. Everything she needed was still there. "Then we finish this together," she said. "Tonight, if we have to." They didn't wait for morning. By the time the sun came up, Eliza and Nathaniel were standing in the middle of Hollow Creek's town square, and half the town had gathered, drawn by whispers that something had happened out past the tree line overnight. Cole arrived last, Constance Whitfield on his arm, confusion arranging itself carefully into concern on his face, the same practiced expression he'd used for 6 years. "Eliza," he said, voice gentle, performative, "whatever's happened, I'm sure we can save it." Eliza opened the notebook and began to read, not everything, not yet, but enough. The land dispute. The inheritance fight 3 territories over. Nathaniel's sister's name spoken aloud for the first time in this town. The auctioneer's inflated bids. The unpaid tab at the general store that had somehow never once been called due. The crowd's murmurs shifted, slow at first, then faster, disbelief curdling into something colder as the pieces clicked into place in real time. "This is absurd," Cole said, but his voice had lost its warmth. "You'd take the word of strangers over 6 years. 6 years of what exactly?" Eliza's voice cut clean through the square. 6 years of never once naming her. 6 years of grief that somehow never once cost you $1, only ever earned you $1. The crowd went very still. "I'd take the word of the woman who tried to kill me last night on your instruction," Eliza said, and the square went utterly silent. "Ask Sela's Duke yourself if you can find him. I imagine he's already halfway out of the territory." Constance's hand slipped slowly from Cole's arm. She looked at him the way a person looks at a stranger wearing a familiar face. "Is it true?" she whispered. "Constance, sweetheart, you know me." "Do I?" Her voice cracked down the middle. "Because I don't think I know your real name. I don't think anyone in this town does." She stepped back from him, one step, then another, like putting distance between herself and a fire she'd only just noticed was burning. 6 years, Cole. 6 years I defended you to my own father." Cole didn't answer, not with words, but something in the way his shoulders dropped, the sorrow mask finally slipping for good, told the whole town everything they needed to know. He was gone from Hollow Creek within the week, no trial, no dramatic arrest, just a man who understood the well had run dry and there was nothing left to drink from. The town he'd spent 6 years charming didn't chase him down. They simply let him go, the way you let go of something you're embarrassed to have held onto so tightly. Constance, for her part, sent Eliza a short note before she left, no anger in it, only something quieter and sadder. "Thank you for not letting me marry a stranger without knowing it." Eliza kept the note folded inside her notebook for a long time after. Eliza stayed a little longer than she'd planned. She told herself it was to finish the story properly, tie up loose ends, make sure Constance and the others understood exactly what had happened and why. But some evenings she found herself on the porch of the boarding house long after the writing was done, and more often than not, Nathaniel was there too, leaning against the rail, in no particular hurry to be anywhere else. "You could have left days ago," she told him once. "Could have," he agreed. "Didn't." Why not? He considered the question longer than it probably deserved. Spent 2 years chasing a man who made a career out of pretending to feel things he didn't. A pause. Didn't expect to run into someone who felt everything and still didn't flinch. I flinched, Eliza admitted quietly. Last night, on the ground with him coming for me, I flinched plenty. Didn't stop you, though. No, she said, it didn't. Eliza looked at him for a long moment, and for the first time since she'd arrived in Hollow Creek, she let herself smile without calculating what it might cost her. That, she said quietly, might be the first honest thing anyone said to me in this whole town. Neither of them rushed to name what was growing between them. It didn't need naming yet. But when Eliza finally did leave Hollow Creek, notebook full and story filed, Nathaniel wasn't 2 steps behind her out of obligation. He simply hadn't finished the ride. And somewhere down the road ahead of them, neither had she. If this story had you holding your breath, that's exactly why we tell them, so don't let it end here. Like this video, if Eliza earned every bit of that ending, comment the one line that hit you hardest, and subscribe so you're here the moment the next story like this one drops. Because Hollow Creek wasn't the only town with a secret this good.